What has the European Union done over the years to really support the Palestinian decades-old struggle for self-determination? Has the EU truly endorsed the Palestinian instinct for freedom? Has the Club of 27 put its finger, whether plural or singular, on the Palestinian pulse? Or has it simply paid lip service with lots of words, lots of euros, but little political action? Welcome to Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions. This is my number 25. Some 20 years ago, I was living in Jerusalem, and one of the hats that I wore then was consultant to Bethlehem 2000, an organization that lasted from 1998 till 2002, and whose defined mandate was to rebuild the infrastructure of Bethlehem and to encourage its cultural pursuits at the turn of the millennium. The Coordinator General of Bethlehem 2000 was Dr. Nabil Qassis, and it included the likes of Dr. Hind Khouri, later to become Palestinian head of mission in France, and Christiane Schmidt, who was seconded by the German government to Bethlehem 2000. In my time at this organization, one thing I recall most vividly was our constant belief that the EU was a reliable banker for Palestinians, and that included Bethlehem 2000, but a lousy political player or influencer. So fast forward some 20 years. I recently watched a webinar entitled The End of Oslo, a New European Strategy on Israel-Palestine, which discussed a policy brief on Palestine published by Hugh Lovatt at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Ibrahim Frehat had organized this webinar on behalf of the Palestine Academic Group. It was moderated by Rami Khouri, with Dr. Hanan Ashrawi and Daniela Huber as noteworthy respondents. The key question for me during the 75-minute webinar was the attempt to explore the nature and extent of the EU role in sustaining Palestinian aspirations, whether the future still favored the two-state solution or the binational one-state solution, or whether the answer should now focus solely on equal rights. The respondents discussed de facto and de jure issues of occupation. They talked about B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, describing Israeli practices in the Palestinian territories as apartheid. They highlighted the changing paradigms, the impunity under international human rights law, the Venice Declaration of June 1980, yes, 1980, and Palestinian self-government. They also talked down the Oslo Accords, a rather fashionable tic displayed by most speakers these days. But in the plethora of words during the 75 minutes, what struck me most were the words of Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. They were pungent. They were fatalistic. They almost admitted to a weary political soul. I paraphrase. "We've done everything you've asked of us," she lamented. "What more can we Palestinians do?" Few weeks earlier, I'd also listened to Dr. Tarek Baconi, a board member of Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, doing an interview with Rethinking Palestine. Tarek discussed the Palestinian struggle for deoccupation and freedom. He talked about new forms of mobilization that can reshape an alternative phase of Palestinian liberation rooted in the power of the people. And by the way, he also strongly suggested that the Great March of Return in Gaza was the biggest example of such grassroots-led mobilization. So do read Hugh Lovatt's robust paper. Watch the 75-minute webinar on YouTube, and also listen to Tarek Baconi's interview. I'll include all 3 links in the description box. And by the way, I'll also include, for your information, a link to the Palestine Academic Group, plus a word or two about the image I'm using for today's YouTube episode and my t-shirt that I chose instead of a proper shirt and tie. But if I'm making an effort to mention these 2 events in my episode today, it is because I have spent quite a lot of time and energy, legal, political, and ecumenical, on the Palestinian question. And I'm patently unhappy that we are still examining symptoms rather than tackling causes. Let me elaborate further. Most of us know, don't we, that the Palestinian Authority is largely inept and impotent. Not solely because of its own faults, which are plentiful incidentally, but also because of Israeli vile practices as an occupying power, as well as due to many other geopolitical realities. Similarly, the PLO, as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, has been marginalized, weakened by intra-Palestinian wars of attrition and internecine fractures. It's lost its way. At best, the PA for me today is a municipality managing Israeli dictates. So I wonder, will the forthcoming legislative and presidential elections now take place as mooted in May and July 2021? And if they do, will they reproduce the same rancid names and agendas? Or will they respond to Palestinian grassroots calls for new institutions that overcome this divisiveness imposed upon them, and in so doing, define a vision against Israeli settler colonialism and against the vested interests that support the status quo? And here is where I have a small problem with the Palestine Academic Group webinar. We are still trading with words. We substitute 2 states with 1 state, and now with equal rights. But how can this come about without EU muscular support for it? This is not like manna falling from heaven, nor is it something that Palestinians can pull off on their own. Will the EU accept to become a game changer and not remain a mere catalyst or banker, increasingly less generous these days, by the way, that offers crumbs of support and sympathy? How do you force the hand of the EU, or any other power lever for that matter, to become more genuine and proactive? Why, for instance, should the EU upset its own apple cart now when it is so busy with the coronavirus, with Brexit, with internal discords, with populism and a grab mentality by some of its 27? Well, you show it that it is in the interest of the EU to change the status quo that has lasted for some 54 years. And here is where Tarek Baconi's interview elegantly kicks in for me. If Palestinians are ever to get some of their rights back, they should, of course, heal their own divisions. This is elementary. This is the analgesic tablet which is available really over the counter, if only somebody goes to buy it. But the antibiotics that go with the painkiller are by far less available. Come Biden, come fresh faces in Palestine and Israel, if things remain the same, unchanged, will the PA resolve to hand back the keys of Area A to Israel? Israel already controls completely areas B and C anyway. And as it does so, would it call for a massive and peaceful popular uprising, mass mobilization as Tarek called it, alongside the totemic First Intifada that lasted from December 1987 till 1993? Will it call for such a mobilization across the whole of the West Bank and Gaza? Now, someone might tell me, hold on, Harry. The PA will not give up on its power base or its interests. Palestinians also are too weary, even defeated, to take an intifada, a third intifada, that will result in further human and economic sacrifices. Others would say that, hold on, the PA is the biggest employment agency in the West Bank. So where would Palestinians be without their job center? I disagree personally with this quietist approach. Palestinian steadfastness, or sumud, is remarkable despite a multitude of obstacles. They will rise up to the occasion if they see that their fresher and younger leaders are serious and honest about the political challenges ahead. And what happens when, if, the PA throws the key away and a revolutionary uprising, to use Rami Khouri's phrase, erupts across the occupied Palestinian territories? One, the Geneva Fourth Convention kicks back in, and the occupying power becomes answerable to the reality of Palestinians under its occupation. Coupled quintessentially, and this is chief amongst the points I'm trying to make, coupled quintessentially with pressure on the EU to act more decisively vis-à-vis this decades-long conflict. I'm confident the key members of this 27 club will be compelled to act rather than just talk or pay the bills. Perhaps a German diplomatic sense of Fingerspitzengefühl, an ethical approach to diplomacy. After all, Palestine is not far from some of our EU shores. Is this a risky strategy? Of course it is, very much so. Is it iffy? Also quite iffy, as it might end up with egg on everyone's face. But tell me, what are the alternatives to US blatant one-sidedness, to EU inertia, to Arab complicity, and to political jaundice by the Palestinians? Europe understands revolutions. Our history is checkered with them. Europe also understands that it had something to do with the way the conflict in Palestine and across the Arab world panned out over the years. In the presentation of his policy brief, Hugh Lovatt recalled the wonderful Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. He didn't continue with the quotation to include the monsters, but never mind, we know the monsters. So I add here another Gramsci quotation. It's quite self-evident, but also quite telling. to tell the truth is revolutionary. So can we exact more of ourselves? Can the EU up its game? Or as so many of the Palestinians in the streets of Palestine would tell you today, as they did yesterday and the day before, باعوا القضية, they have sold Palestine. But who are the ones who sold Palestine? And for how many pieces of silver? So my challenge today, harsh and hard as it is quite simple. How can the EU really help buy back Palestine to its rightful owners? 54 years hence, I still haven't fully abandoned hope. Take care and stay safe.